to provide an overview of some basic advertising law principles and considerations to take with you to your companies. So on slide 2, you'll see a general overview of the topics that we'll be discussing today. So first, I'll introduce the Federal Trade Commission Act and the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC. Then we'll look at how the FTC and the FDA have divided their responsibilities in their Memorandum of Understanding. Then we'll discuss basic principles of advertising law and some of the, so-called hot topics in advertising law, so issues that we commonly see that affect companies in FDA-regulated industries. And then we'll touch on some of the other sources of advertising law challenges that your companies may face, including the National Advertising Division, or the NAD, which is one of the advertising law self-regulatory organizations you may have heard about. So then we'll wrap up with some best practices and considerations that companies in the FDA-regulated space should take into account. And if we have time, we'll take some questions and maybe discuss some of the difficulties that companies can face in complying with both FDA and advertising law. So on to slide 3. So let's start with the source of advertising law. It's really the Federal Trade Commission Act, the main one. There are 3 sections in particular that you may hear referenced when talking about advertising law. The first, Section 5 of the FTCA, broadly prohibits unfair or deceptive acts or practices in or affecting commerce. So note that false, misleading, or unsubstantiated advertising falls under the deception prong, and that's usually what people speak about when we're talking about advertising law. Section 12 prohibits false advertisements and even specifically prohibits false advertisements for foods, drugs, devices, services, and cosmetics, which is particularly relevant for your companies, likely. And Section 15 specifies that a false advertisement is an advertisement which is misleading in a material respect. So this would include materially misleading statements, but also the omission of material information. So on to the reach of the FTCA. The Act is very broad in scope. It really applies to representations for virtually all products and services and almost all types of communications. So this could be print, broadcast, the internet, packaging and labeling, social media, direct mail, even face-to-face interactions and communications. Furthermore, all parties who participate directly or indirectly may be liable. So there have been cases where FTC has held, ad agencies responsible, expert endorsers. It could be individuals, so not just the manufacturers or the marketers of the product. One notable limitation is that the Act does not reach commerce outside the United States. So if you have any marketing practices that are outside of this country, those generally are not subject to FTC's jurisdiction. So it's really talking about the U.S. So next let's look at the Federal Trade Commission, and this is the agency with primary jurisdiction over advertising law issues in the U.S. And this was created by the FTCA and the FTCA gave the FTC the power to enforce the Act, including the power to conduct investigations relating to the organization, business, practices, and management of entities engaged in commerce.